When the feds finally take down a cartel leader, the raids, the arrests, the press conferences, the government wants you to believe it's over. Case closed, threat neutralized, move on. But here's what they don't put in the press release. These organizations didn't survive for decades because of one man. They survived because of families. Because while the boss was making headlines, his son was learning the routes. His daughter was moving the money. His brother was building the relationships. These weren't people who chose this life from the outside. They were raised inside it, groomed for it from childhood. And in a lot of cases, they were already running operations before anyone even knew their name. And in 2026, the cleanup is far from done. Some of these family members stepped up the moment their loved one got locked up or taken out. Some of them are more dangerous than the person they replaced. Some are wanted by multiple governments and still moving like ghosts. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the most dangerous cartel family members that are still active right now. And trust me, fam, some of these names are gonna surprise you. Because the cartel business, it don't stay in one generation. Let's get into it. And there's no better place to start than with Jessica Johanna Oseguera Gonzalez, better known on the streets as La Negra. Because when your father is El Mencho, the most wanted and most feared drug lord on the planet right now, the smart move is to disappear. Stay quiet, stay invisible. Let somebody else take the heat. But La Negra looked at all of that and chose a completely different path. Instead of running from her father's name, she leaned into it, and the US government took notice real fast. Imagine growing up so poor that your children went to bed hungry most nights. No electricity, no clean water, dirt floors, a mountain village so remote that even the Mexican government forgot it existed. That was Consuelo Loera's life for the first 50 years of her existence, and the lives of every woman who came before her in La Tuna, Sinaloa. Then one of her sons started making money. Not a little money. Not enough money to move the family to Culiacan and buy a nice house. We are talking about the kind of money that put this woman on the radar of American presidents. The kind of money that flew in private jets carrying Mexico's most beloved singer, just to perform one birthday song for her in a mountain village that barely had paved roads. The kind of money that built her a home so distinctive, it became a landmark. A church built in her honor. Armed bodyguards around the clock. And every single rose in town bought out on her birthday, every single year. Her son became the most powerful drug lord in history, a man with a net worth estimated in the billions. And when Joaquin El Chapo Guzman decided to spend that money, the woman he spent it on first, and most, was his mother. But here is what nobody tells you. Consuelo Loera could have lived like a queen. Gold fixtures, marble floors, armored convoys. She had access to resources that most heads of state could only dream about. And instead, she sat in plastic lawn chairs on a concrete patio. She cooked beans on an old enamel stove. She memorized scripture and led prayers for the dead in a village where everybody came to her door when grief arrived. Today we are going inside the life of the most important woman El Chapo ever knew. How she raised him in conditions most people would not survive. How he tried to repay her for that, and how far he went to do it. And then the part of this story that most people never talk about. What happened when he went to prison for good? How many times she was denied the right to see her own son? How many letters she wrote to presidents and popes? And how she died in a hospital bed in Culiacan, still waiting for a visa that never came. Stay with us until the end, because the woman behind El Chapo is a story all by herself. To understand Consuelo Loera, you have to understand where she came from, Because the place did not just shape her, it shaped everything that followed. The cartel, the violence, the empire. It all traces back to a village so small and so forgotten that most Mexicans had never heard of it until the name El Chapo became international news. La Tuna is located in the municipality of Badiraguato, Sinaloa, deep in the Sierra Madre Occidental, the mountain range that cuts through northwestern Mexico and forms the spine of what authorities call the Golden Triangle. That is the region where Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua meet. For generations, the people who lived there survived by doing what the land allowed, growing crops, raising livestock, and because the terrain was perfect for it, and because there was no other economy, cultivating poppy and marijuana. Drug production was not a moral choice in La Tuna. It was survival. It was what your father did, and his father before him, and it was what the local strongmen expected from you if you wanted to stay. Maria Consuelo Loera Perez was born into that world in either 1928 or 1929. Records in places like La Tuna were not always carefully kept. Her parents were Ovidio Loera Cobre and Pomposa Perez Uriarte, farmers who worked the land and had nothing extra to give. Consuelo grew up learning what every woman in that part of the Sierra learned: how to cook over an open fire, how to prepare remedies from local plants, how to survive drought and hunger, and the kind of isolation that comes from living 7 hours by dirt road from the nearest city. She had no formal education to speak of, but she was sharp. The kind of sharp that comes from watching, observing, understanding people and situations without needing a classroom to teach you. From a young age, she had a reputation in La Tuna as someone you went to when things went wrong. Her home remedies worked. Her counsel was sound. Her faith was total. She married Emilio Guzman Bustillos, a man from the same world she had grown up in. Together they had children. Sources vary on the exact number, some saying as many as 11, with at least 6 surviving to adulthood. 5 of her children died young. Malnutrition, illness, the brutal arithmetic of poverty in a remote mountain village with no hospitals and no safety net. That kind of loss changes a person. It hardens something in you while simultaneously making you ferocious about the ones who survive. Her surviving children were Joaquin, who the world would come to know as El Chapo, along with Aureliano, known as El Guano, Arturo, known as El Pollo, Miguel Angel, known as El Mudo, and her 2 daughters, Armida and Bernarda, who would eventually become her caretakers in old age. Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Loera was born on April 4, 1957, in La Tuna. He was among the children Consuelo brought into that harsh mountain world, and by all accounts, including her own, he was different from the start. In a rare interview with PBS Frontline that aired in 2015, Consuelo Loera shared a memory that said everything about who her son was before the world knew his name. She described him as a small boy, sitting and playing with paper money, little notes of 50 and 5, counting them and recounting them, stacking them in neat little piles, then tying them up. She smiled when she told the story. The notes were fake, just colored paper from a child's game. But he treated them like they were real. He organized them. He managed them. Even then, she said, he had ambitions. His father, Emilio Guzman Bustillos, was not a gentle presence in the home. El Chapo endured physical abuse at his father's hands, and it was his father who first introduced him to the drug trade, using the boy to help grow marijuana for local dealers when he was barely old enough to work. This was common in La Tuna. The Sierra's economy demanded it. But when Joaquin was a teenager, his father kicked him out of the house, and the boy went to live with his grandfather. Meanwhile, Consuelo kept the home running on almost nothing. The family had no electricity, no running water, no infrastructure of any kind. She cooked over firewood. She gathered food from the land. She raised her surviving children with strict discipline and a faith so deep it became the organizing principle of her entire existence. She began reading scripture obsessively, memorizing passages, leading prayer gatherings for neighbors. In a place where the church was the only institution that showed up consistently, she became a pillar of it. Joaquin left Badiraguato in his 20s, connecting first with local drug networks and then through his uncle Pedro Aviles Perez, one of the pioneers of Mexican drug trafficking, making his way into the Guadalajara Cartel, the most powerful criminal organization in Mexico in the 1980s. He was ambitious, ruthless, and strategic. He worked under Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, known as El Padrino, the godfather of modern Mexican trafficking. He learned the business from the inside out, and he rose fast. Back in La Tuna, Consuelo Loera watched her son go and kept her silence. She did not ask questions she did not want answers to. She held a Bible in one hand and took whatever help came her way with the other. And when the money started arriving, real money, not the colored paper her boy used to count, she said nothing publicly about where it came from. She just thanked God and kept praying. In 1989, El Chapo built his mother a house, not just any house. In a village where people lived in small structures with minimal construction, he built a property that stood out the way a lighthouse stands out on a dark coast. It sat on the hillside of La Tuna, not at the base, where flooding was a risk, but elevated, commanding a panoramic view of the entire surrounding region. Its walls were painted a distinctive pink and brown. It had wide patios, bougainvillea gardens, multiple rooms, a kiosco, a private covered outdoor pavilion, built in the back courtyard just for her personal use. The kind of thing you would find at a hacienda, not a mountain village in a poor municipality. The community named it the Casa Rosa, the Pink House. And everybody in La Tuna knew the way to it, not because it was the seat of cartel power, but because Dona Consuelo had made it the spiritual center of the community. When someone died in La Tuna, you went to the Casa Rosa. You knocked on that door, and the small woman with the Bible would come walking through her bougainvillea gardens, take short, patient steps to receive the news, agree to lead the prayers, and then go spend hours in her private chapel, preparing herself before coming back out to minister to the grief. The chapel was the other thing El Chapo built for her in 1989. Right there inside the property, a dedicated place of worship for the Apostolic Church of the Faith in Jesus Christ, the evangelical denomination Consuelo had committed herself to. He hired a pastor to live in the village. Every Sunday from 10 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, she would sit with her congregation and pray and sing. For over 30 years, her son, the man building one of the world's most powerful drug trafficking empires, funded her church, had it painted every year, kept it immaculate. Journalists who eventually made it to La Tuna, a journey that required up to 7 hours by car followed by checkpoints and informants, described what they found when Dona Consuelo opened her door. The outside of the Casa Rosa looked imposing, striking. It did not belong in this landscape, but inside, white plastic chairs, a wood bench on the terrace, a large kitchen with a basic enamel stove, and a sink with dishes drying on the rack. Her bedroom was mint green, with a varnished wood dresser and 2 framed photographs. There was no marble, no gold, no symbols of excess. She kept it that way on purpose. One of the things she taught the women of her generation in La Tuna was exactly this: resist the temptation of luxury. Keep a comfortable life, not a flashy one. Do not attract the government's attention. The same discipline she applied to raising her children in poverty, she applied to receiving her son's wealth. Accept enough to live with dignity. Reject everything that screamed cartel money. Visitors who came to interview her over the years almost always left talking about one thing above everything else. She offered them food: rabbit asado, machaca, tamales, pozole. She cooked for journalists, the same way she cooked for the community during Patriotic Month. Generous, simple, prepared with skill, developed over decades of necessity. But do not mistake humility for a lack of devotion from her son, because what El Chapo gave his mother went far beyond a pink house and a church. Dona Consuelo was quiet about the details, but the village was not. Stories traveled in La Tuna the way they always travel in small communities. Through the mouths of people who witnessed things, who worked at the house, who saw the convoys arrive. The most legendary story was the birthday concert. Juan Gabriel was the greatest singer in Mexican popular music history, a performer whose emotional voice and dramatic style made him Mexico's answer to an entire era of longing and joy. He was beloved across every class, every region, and he performed for presidents and aristocrats. He was also based in California. And for one of Consuelo Loera's birthdays, El Chapo arranged to fly Juan Gabriel in on a private jet from the United States to La Tuna, a remote mountain village with no proper airport, no stage, no proper venue, just so he could stand in front of the matriarch of the Guzman family and sing Las Mananas to her, one birthday song. A private performance in a village where the biggest local event was Sunday church service. Then back on the jet. That is not a gift. That is a statement. That is a man telling the world and his mother that there is nothing he cannot arrange and nothing he will not do for the woman who raised him. On her birthdays, every red rose available in La Tuna was bought out. Not some of the roses, all of them. Stories told in the village claimed she had millions stored somewhere on the property, in the backyard, behind walls, in places the cameras and journalists never reached. Whether that is folklore or fact, no one outside the family ever confirmed it. But the stories persisted, the way legends always persist around people whose power is felt but never fully visible. Beyond the spectacle of birthdays, what El Chapo gave his mother was consistent and structural. He gave her security. After the narco world started heating up and cartel rivalries turned lethal, she traveled with armed protection. Escorts followed her. Guards were posted. In a world where your son's enemies considered your existence a potential leverage point, he made sure she was surrounded. He also gave her influence she never asked for but carried naturally. The doors of the Casa Rosa were open to everyone: local politicians, priests, rivals, journalists. People showed up to speak with Dona Consuelo because her name opened every door in that part of Sinaloa. Because her son was El Chapo, but also because she was genuinely respected on her own terms, as a healer, a prayer leader, a woman whose home remedies worked and whose counsel was sound. She had built that reputation herself, long before the money came. The money just made it bigger. She reportedly maintained correspondence with Pope John Paul II, letters she sent to the Vatican about her community and her faith. And according to the stories that circulate in La Tuna, the Pope wrote back in his own handwriting, grateful for her works. The image of Consuelo Loera in correspondence with the head of the Catholic Church while her son ran the most powerful drug cartel in the world is one of those details that stops you cold. And then there was the Cardinal story. When Mexican authorities accused El Chapo of involvement in the 1993 assassination of Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, the Archbishop of Guadalajara, killed in a hail of gunfire at the Guadalajara airport in what authorities claimed was a case of mistaken identity during a cartel hit. Dona Consuelo was reportedly furious, so outraged by the association of her son's name with the murder of a priest that she made her position known in no uncertain terms. She reportedly demanded a brief truce with the Tijuana Cartel be established out of respect for the cardinal's memory, and she told her son that weapons should never again be directed at a priest. El Chapo, the man who had people executed for late drug shipments, listened to his mother. He agreed. The rule about priests became something close to standing policy in his operation. That is the measure of her authority over him. Not formal power, not a title, just the absolute, unconditional weight of a mother's expectations over a son who had never forgotten where he came from. Here is something that investigators and journalists pieced together during the years El Chapo spent as a fugitive. He kept coming back to La Tuna. Not occasionally, regularly. After his second prison escape in 2015, when he disappeared through a mile-long tunnel, dug directly into his cell at the Altiplano Maximum Security Facility, in one of the most audacious prison breaks in history, the entire Mexican military was mobilized to find him. The DEA was involved. Every intelligence agency with a stake in his capture was watching. And yet, locals in La Tuna told journalists who managed to reach the village that El Chapo came and went from those mountains, primarily to visit his aging mother. He confirmed it himself. In the now infamous interview he gave to actor Sean Penn for Rolling Stone magazine, arranged through Mexican telenovela star Kate del Castillo, published in January 2016, Penn reportedly asked him directly, "Do you see your mother much?" El Chapo's response was simple and immediate. All the time, he said. He told Penn he had hoped they could meet at his ranch and that Penn could meet his mother. That she knew him better than he knew himself. Something came up and the plan changed. But the sentiment was clear. Even at the height of his fugitive life, even with the most sophisticated surveillance apparatus in North America hunting him, his primary reason for returning to those mountains was his mother. Think about what that means. This was a man who had tunnels built under prisons, who bribed judges, generals, and cabinet ministers, who moved billions of dollars of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine across borders with precision. And the thing that kept pulling him back to a place where he was most vulnerable, a place intelligence agencies knew he had ties to, was an elderly woman sitting in a pink house on a hillside, cooking stew on an old stove, reading her Bible. In January 2017, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was extradited to the United States. It was the end of a long and humiliating chapter for the Mexican government, which had watched him escape twice from its own maximum security facilities. American prosecutors wanted him badly, and when he was finally handed over, they made sure he would never escape again. He was held in various facilities during his trial, which began in late 2018 in Brooklyn, New York. In February 2019, a federal jury convicted him on all counts: drug trafficking, murder conspiracy, money laundering, weapons charges. The list was long and the evidence was overwhelming. Witnesses who had spent years inside his operation described murder plots, bribery on a staggering scale, and drug shipments measured in the hundreds of tons. In July 2019, a federal judge sentenced Joaquin Guzman Loera to life in prison plus 30 years with no possibility of parole. He was transferred to ADX Florence in Colorado, the most secure federal prison in the United States, where inmates are kept in near total isolation, allowed minimal contact with the outside world, and where the architecture itself is designed to prevent any form of escape. For Consuelo Loera, this was not just her son going to prison, this was her child. The boy she had watched count fake paper money in the mountains, being placed inside a concrete box on the other side of a border she had never crossed, in a country that now considered him one of its most dangerous enemies. She was in her late 80s. She had already outlived several of her children, and now the most famous one was locked away in a place she could not reach. She immediately began trying to reach him. In 2019, the same year El Chapo was sentenced, Consuelo Loera made a trip to Mexico City, to the United States Embassy. Photographs from that day show her arriving by car, an elderly woman in her 90s, sitting in the back seat, waiting her turn to request a humanitarian visa. The kind of visa granted in exceptional circumstances to allow family members to visit imprisoned relatives in the United States. The request was denied. She also sent a letter to Donald Trump, then the sitting president of the United States. Personally requesting his intervention, she wrote to the Mexican government. She wrote to anyone who might have the authority or the compassion to let a 90-year-old woman cross a border to see her child. The answers were all the same: no. The United States government's position was consistent. El Chapo was housed at ADX Florence for reasons that went beyond punishment. He was considered a national security concern. Keeping his contact with the outside world limited was part of that. The idea that the mother of the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, an organization the United States had spent decades trying to dismantle, would be permitted to walk into ADX Florence for a visit was, from their perspective, not just a legal question, but a security one. None of that mattered to Consuelo Loera. She was not thinking about cartel dynamics or national security policy. She was thinking about her son. The boy who counted fake money. The one who built her a church and flew in Juan Gabriel on a jet and made sure every rose in La Tuna was bought on her birthday. He was behind a wall she could not get through, and she was running out of time. In March of 2020, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known throughout Mexico as AMLO, was making a visit to Badiraguato to supervise the construction of a highway project. The road ran through the region where Consuelo Loera lived. Word reached her that the president was nearby. She went to see him. AMLO was at the event when word came that an elderly woman wanted to greet him. He walked to the passenger side of her vehicle. She extended her hand through the window. He shook it. And then she handed him a letter. The photographs of that handshake went everywhere. Mexico erupted. Critics accused the president of legitimizing the family of the country's most destructive criminal organization, in a country where the Sinaloa cartel had been linked to tens of thousands of deaths, where an entire generation had grown up under the shadow of narco violence. The image of a sitting president clasping the hand of El Chapo's mother was seen by many as an outrage. AMLO defended himself at his Monday press briefing. He said he was told she had come to the event and wanted to greet him. He said it would have been disrespectful not to go. He said, "It is very difficult humanly. I am not a robot." He added that she deserves all my respect regardless of who her son is. What was in the letter? 2 requests. First, could the Mexican government intervene to help her daughters obtain permission to visit El Chapo in the United States? Second, could her son be repatriated to Mexico to serve out the rest of his sentence closer to home? AMLO did not ignore the letter. He forwarded it to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which passed it to the American Embassy in Mexico City. A response came back. One of El Chapo's sisters would be permitted a visit. It was a procedural concession, not a policy change. But for Consuelo Loera, it was something. It was proof that a letter written by an old woman in a mountain village could still reach the ear of power. She also wrote to Donald Trump directly, not through intermediaries, but a personal appeal requesting a humanitarian visa so she and a companion could travel to Colorado to see Joaquin. She told anyone who would listen, "My petition is that they allow me to go see him, and that they transfer him here to Mexico so that God can help him." Nothing changed. The visa did not come. The transfer did not happen. The wall between mother and son remained in place. The peace of the Casa Rosa was shattered once, violently, and without warning. In June 2016, while El Chapo was imprisoned in Mexico following his second capture, a convoy of approximately 150 armed men arrived in La Tuna. They stormed the property and the surrounding area. 3 nearby residents were killed. The attackers stole 3 vehicles, 3 motorcycles, and cut the telephone lines to isolate the village from outside communication. Consuelo Loera was not harmed. Whether that was by design, attackers reluctant to touch her specifically, or simply a matter of circumstance, no one has confirmed. No group claimed responsibility for the attack, but investigators and journalists familiar with the Sinaloa landscape believed it bore the hallmarks of the Beltran Leyva organization, a faction whose family had been in violent conflict with the Chapo faction of the Sinaloa cartel for years. El Chapo, imprisoned at the time, heard about what happened to his mother's home, and his response was immediate. She would never leave the property without armed protection again. From that point forward, bodyguards were a permanent part of her daily existence. When she moved, they moved. When she sat in church, they were outside. When journalists came to interview her, men with weapons were nearby, watching. After 2016, she stopped living at the Casa Rosa full-time. The attack had made the property feel exposed, despite its hillside position. She relocated, though the Casa Rosa remained intact, maintained, its bougainvillea gardens tended, its chapel painted fresh each year as it always had been. An empty monument to a woman who had been displaced from her own home because her son's enemies saw her address as a target. By 2021, Consuelo Loera was in her 90s. The COVID pandemic had swept through Mexico, and according to some reports, it reached her as well, causing respiratory complications that lingered and contributed to a gradual decline in her health. She was watched over by her daughters Armida and Bernarda, the 2 women who had committed themselves to her care in her final years. Her world had shrunk considerably. The village visits, the church, the private chapel, the plastic chairs on the terrace, the cooking she had never stopped doing, the scripture she had never stopped memorizing. But the horizon that had once felt expansive, even in poverty, even in remoteness, there had always been the sense that her son was somewhere out there, moving through the world with terrifying power, had collapsed to the distance between La Tuna and a federal maximum security prison in Colorado. She wrote more letters to AMLO, to government officials, to international human rights organizations. The argument she made, and it was not a complicated argument, was that no mother should be denied the right to see her child, especially in her final years. That regardless of what Joaquin had done, she was not on trial. She was an old woman who had raised a family in poverty and asked for nothing except the chance to look her son in the face one more time before she died. The American government's answer did not change. The security classification that surrounded El Chapo's imprisonment at ADX Florence was not designed to accommodate the emotional needs of his family. Visits were restricted, contact with the outside world was minimal. The prison's entire architecture was built around the principle that men like Joaquin Guzman Loera, who had bribed his way out of 2 of Mexico's most secure facilities, could never be given an inch of space for maneuver. She would say, through her lawyers, through journalists who reached her, that the one wish she had left was to embrace her son before either of them ran out of time. Not to discuss cartel business, not to communicate anything to the outside world, just to be a mother in the room with her child. The most fundamental human thing imaginable. And the answer was still no. In late November 2023, Consuelo Loera was hospitalized at a private clinic in Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa. She had been dealing with multiple health issues, the compound effects of age, trazatwai, trazimobile, prior respiratory illness, and the slow wait of 94 years. Her daughters were there. The doctors did what they could. Approximately 20 days after a gallbladder surgery, on Sunday, December 10, 2023, Maria Consuelo Loera Perez died. She was 94 years old by most accounts. Some reports placed her at 95. Her attorneys in Mexico confirmed the death to media, and by Monday, the news had reached AMLO at his regular morning press briefing. The president offered his condolences. He said what he said when anyone died. Any human being who loses their life deserves respect. Their grieving family deserves consideration. Per the wishes she had expressed, her body was returned to La Tuna, the village that had shaped her, the mountain community where she had been born, raised her children, survived poverty and violence, and the slow disappearance of everyone she loved. Governor Ruben Rocha Moya of Sinaloa confirmed it. She would go home to rest. The red roses in La Tuna sold out again. Not for her birthday this time, for her funeral. The same gesture that had been a celebration for decades became a final farewell. She died with one wish unfulfilled. She had written it explicitly in her final letter to AMLO, the one he received and forwarded to the Foreign Ministry and the American Embassy. She did not want to die without traveling to the United States to hold her son one last time. She wanted to embrace Joaquin, to sit with him, to be his mother in the room, not through lawyers and letters and government intermediaries. It never happened. The visa never came. A DX Florence never opened its doors for her. Consuelo Loera died waiting for a border that did not move. And somewhere in a concrete cell in Colorado, the most powerful drug lord in history learned that his mother was gone, without him getting to say goodbye. When you look at the complete life of Maria Consuelo Loera Perez, not just as El Chapo's mother, but as a person who existed for 94 years across one of the most turbulent chapters in Mexican history, what you see is someone who refused to be swallowed by the story she was born into. She was born into poverty so severe that 5 of her children died before they could grow up. She raised the rest in a mountain village the world forgot existed, on firewood and faith and sheer will. One of those children became the most powerful criminal in the world. He built her a pink house on a hillside. He flew in her favorite singer on a private jet. He bought out every rose in town on her birthday. He built her a church. He stationed armed guards around her. He came back to that mountain again and again, even as the most wanted man in North America, because she was there. And she, for her part, cooked beans on a simple stove and sat in plastic chairs and denied everything to the cameras and kept her Bible close and never stopped praying that her son would turn himself over to God before it was too late. She was not innocent of the world her son built. She was the beneficiary of it. She lived in a house drug money built and worshipped, in a church drug money funded, and traveled with bodyguards, drug money paid for. She knew what her son was. You do not raise a man from infancy in those mountains, watch him leave for the life he left for, and pretend you do not understand what happened. She understood. She just refused to say it out loud. But here is what is also true. She spent the last years of her life writing letters to presidents and popes and anyone who would listen, asking for nothing more than the right to see her child. She died without getting it. In a country that prides itself on certain values, on family, on faith, on the human dignity of an elderly woman, the most famous grandmother in Sinaloa spent her final chapter being told no by a government on the other side of a river. El Chapo went from a boy counting fake paper money in a mountain village to the leader of a billion-dollar empire that moved drugs to every corner of the earth. And the one person he could not outrun, the one obligation he could never negotiate his way out of, was the woman who raised him in that mountain. She was his anchor and his limit and his conscience. And in the end, the one loss he had to absorb sitting alone in a concrete room with no windows and no way to say goodbye. That is the story of Consuelo Loera, the woman behind El Chapo, the one who held a Bible in one hand and accepted everything the other hand brought, with silence, with faith, and with a dignity that no amount of money could have manufactured and no prison wall could take away. Right now, in 2026, there is a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly $1 billion, who cannot step outside his own front door without a full military-style security detail surrounding him. He can't post on social media anymore, can't pull up to a restaurant, can't fly commercial, can't drive through his own city without worrying that the next vehicle behind him is either a rival cartel or a Mexican Special Forces unit with orders to bring him in dead or alive. And yet, this man is still living better than 99.9% of people on this planet. His name is Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar, known to the world as El Chapito, the last free son of El Chapo. And in 2026, the United States government is offering $10 million just for information about where he sleeps at night. Stay with us until the end of this video, because what we uncovered about how this man actually lives in 2026, the cars, the safe houses, the people protecting him, the tunnels he uses to disappear, this is a level of cartel luxury that most people have never seen documented in one place. And by the end, you're going to understand something that nobody talks about: how the most wanted man in Mexico is somehow still living like a king. Ivan Archivaldo was born into something most cartel kids could only dream about. His father wasn't just any trafficker. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman was, at his peak, the most powerful drug lord in the history of the Western Hemisphere, running a multi-billion-dollar operation that moved cocaine, heroin, and eventually fentanyl across the US border like a corporation moves inventory. But here's what really went down with the sons. El Chapo had dozens of kids from multiple women. Most of them were kept far from the business. But the two sons from his first wife, Ivan Archivaldo, and his brother Jesus Alfredo, known as Alfredillo, those two were different. Those were the ones El Chapo groomed. Those were the ones he brought into meetings, introduced to plaza bosses, trusted with operations while he was on the run. So when El Chapo got extradited to the United States in 2017 and was handed a life sentence in 2019, the empire didn't collapse. It transferred, and Ivan Archivaldo stepped into a role that most men would be terrified to hold. Now it's 2026. Two of his half-brothers, Ovidio and Joaquin, are already in U.S. custody cutting deals. His brother Alfredillo is underground, and Ivan is the last one standing, still running the Sinaloa cartel's most powerful faction, still somewhere in Mexico, and still somehow living like an untouchable. To understand how that's even possible, and what that life actually looks like, we gotta go back to where it all started. Let's rewind. The year is 2003. Ivan Archivaldo is barely 20 years old, and already the Sinaloa cartel is the most dominant drug trafficking organization in Mexico. His father controls smuggling routes from the Pacific coast all the way through the southwest border of the United States. Tunnels, planes, submarines. El Chapo built infrastructure that made other cartels look amateur. And Ivan grew up inside all of it. Here's where this story is different from every other cartel biography you've watched. El Chapo himself grew up dirt poor. A campesino from the mountains of Badiraguato, Sinaloa, surviving on nothing. That hunger is what made him dangerous. But Ivan never knew what hunger felt like. He was born into the money, born into the compound life, the private schools, the luxury that his father's operation funded from day one. Journalists who covered the Sinaloa cartel during that era described the Guzman sons as a different breed. Not street soldiers who worked their way up, but heirs who were handed the keys. And early on, a lot of people in the cartel dismissed them. Spoiled kids, they said. Rich boys who would fold under pressure. They were wrong. In February 2005, Ivan got arrested in Guadalajara on money laundering charges. He was in his early 20s, sitting in a vehicle with associates when local police pulled them over. They found evidence tying him to the organization. The government hit him with a case, sent him to La Palma, one of Mexico's most secure federal prisons, and it looked like El Chapo's heir was done before he even got started. But this is where you start to understand how the Guzman family operates. El Chapo didn't just have money. He had influence inside every institution in Mexico that mattered. According to investigative journalist Anabel Hernandez, when Ivan wrote to his father from prison asking for warmer clothes to deal with the cold, El Chapo asked the prison guards for help smuggling in the clothes. The guards, who were already on the cartel payroll, raised their fee to $500,000 just for that one favor. $500,000 to smuggle in clothes for one request. That tells you everything about what kind of money we're talking about. By 2008, Ivan successfully appealed his conviction. A federal judge ruled there was insufficient proof his money came from drug trafficking, other than the fact that his father was the world's most wanted drug trafficker. The judge and another official were later suspended on suspicion of irregularities in their rulings. Ivan walked out a free man, and from that point forward, he never looked back. By the time the 2010s rolled around, Ivan Archivaldo wasn't just a cartel member. He was becoming something completely new in the narco world. A public figure. A brand. This man was posting on Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, and Twitter, while simultaneously running one of the most violent criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. Security analysts were baffled. Raul Benitez, a Mexican security specialist, told the Associated Press directly, "A serious narco doesn't do that." But Ivan didn't care, because Ivan Archivaldo wasn't his father. El Chapo operated in total secrecy for decades. Ivan operated in public, blurred faces in his photos, and posted anyway. He had over 220,000 Instagram followers on an account widely attributed to him, and every post was basically a flex showcase. Exotic cars, private planes, alcohol. We're talking Moet Chandon, top shelf everything. Women, beach vacations, boxing matches in Las Vegas, gambling trips. This was the narco influencer era, and Ivan was one of the originals. Now here's what's important to understand about that choice. In Mexican narco culture, especially in Sinaloa, status is currency. The corridos written about you, the lifestyle people see you living. That's part of how you maintain control. It's intimidation through aspiration. When the people under you see that kind of life, that kind of wealth, they're more loyal. When rivals see it, they know what they're up against. Ivan was broadcasting power. Then things got serious in a different way. In August 2016, Ivan and his brother Alfredillo were kidnapped in broad daylight by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG. The two most important sons of El Chapo were snatched from La Leche restaurant, an upscale tourist spot in Puerto Vallarta with people around them. This wasn't some dark alley. This was a luxury restaurant in a tourist zone. The CJNG held them for days. The entire Sinaloa cartel mobilized. Both brothers were eventually released. The terms were never made public, but the message was clear. The Chapitos had power, but they also had targets on their backs for life. Then came the event that defined who Ivan Archivaldo truly was. October 17, 2019, Culiacan. Mexican security forces moved on Ovidio Guzman Lopez, one of Ivan's half-brothers. and briefly arrested him in the city. What happened next was unlike anything seen in modern Mexican history. Within hours, hundreds of armed cartel gunmen flooded the streets of Culiacan in armored vehicles equipped with rocket launchers. Military families in a housing complex were taken hostage. Soldiers were captured. The entire city turned into a war zone. The Mexican government, under then-President López Obrador, made the decision to release Ovidio rather than risk more civilian casualties. The cartel had forced a government to stand down. And Iván Arquivaldo was one of the men who orchestrated that response. That wasn't just drug trafficking, that was military-level power projection. From that point on, the United States government's interest in the Chapitos moved from investigation to full-scale pursuit. In 2023, a grand jury in the Northern District of Illinois handed down a massive indictment. Iván charged with conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, running a continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering, and involvement in murders. The U.S. State Department put a $5 million reward on his head. That number later jumped to $10 million. But Iván was still free, still in Sinaloa, still running operations. So now we get to the part of this video that nobody has put together in one place. What does Iván Arquivaldo's life actually look like in 2026? Not what it used to look like. Not the Instagram posts from 2018. What does it look like right now, when he is the most wanted man still breathing free air in Mexico? Because here's the thing, the lifestyle didn't disappear, it evolved. It went underground, and in some ways it got more extreme. First, you have to understand how Iván moves. He doesn't stay in one place. According to reporting from the Wall Street Journal in May 2025, Mexican Special Forces raided a safe house in Culiacan, where they found evidence of Iván's recent presence. They were close. But he was already gone, reportedly through an underground tunnel connected to the property. Tunnels. Just like his father. El Chapo's most famous escapes were through tunnels. A mile-long tunnel from his prison cell in 2015, complete with a motorcycle on tracks. And now in 2026, his son is using the same playbook just to survive day-to-day life in his own city. The properties Iván operates out of are reportedly built with escape infrastructure, multiple exit routes, underground passages connecting to neighboring buildings, to streets, to drainage systems. This isn't a coincidence. This is a design philosophy. The Guzman family learned that staying in one place gets you caught. Movement is survival. So the luxury lifestyle in 2026 is distributed across multiple locations. There's no single mansion where Iván parks himself. Instead, you're talking about a rotating circuit of compounds. Some in the urban sprawl of Culiacan, others in the mountains of Sinaloa, where cartel infrastructure has existed for decades. Some sources describe properties in remote areas where only trusted people know the coordinates, surrounded by lookouts and armed security positioned at every access point. Let's talk about the fleet, because this is where the Chapito lifestyle has always been most visible. For real, Iván's car collection was documented across multiple social media platforms in its prime years. We're talking supercars, armored SUVs, custom trucks. Think Ferrari, Lamborghini, Porsche, but also the narco-custom side of things. In Sinaloa cartel culture, vehicles often get custom bulletproof modifications, lifted trucks with reinforced bodies, and interiors that look like they belong in a penthouse. Gold and chrome trim, custom leather, entertainment systems, refrigerators, weapons storage compartments hidden in the chassis. But in 2026, those vehicles don't get posted online anymore. The flex era is over, at least publicly. Now the same cars exist, but they're moved strategically. Iván doesn't take the same route twice. The convoy around him isn't just for show, it's operational. Multiple vehicles, counter-surveillance teams, decoy vehicles running different routes simultaneously. When he moves, it looks like a military operation. Lead vehicle sweeps the road. Follow vehicles monitor for tails. Ivan himself could be in any one of them, or none of them. The whole system is designed so that even someone watching from a distance can't be certain which vehicle to target. Think about what that means in practical terms. You cannot just own a Ferrari in 2026 and drive it through Culiacan. When you are Ivan Archivaldo, the car exists. Probably multiple Ferraris exist, but they stay behind compound walls until the conditions are right, until the intelligence says the route is clean, until the security team has swept every kilometer. That is not freedom. That is the most expensive captivity in the world, and his chief financial operator has already been extradited to the United States. The money manager who handled the cash flows for Ivan's side of the cartel, federal agents got to him first, which means the financial infrastructure around Ivan has had to adapt, restructure, and go deeper underground. New intermediaries, new channels, new trusted people who may or may not actually be trustworthy. Every restructuring creates new vulnerabilities, and Ivan knows it. This is something most people don't talk about when they describe cartel luxury. The actual human cost of keeping a man like Ivan alive. According to a narco corrido called El Tiempo es Caro, his top security figure's role included direct personal protection of Ivan Archivaldo 24 hours a day. We're talking a full private army, not 3 guys with pistols. A structured military hierarchy with radio communications, intelligence gathering, and real-time threat assessment. The same operation that mobilized hundreds of gunmen across Culiacan in 2019 can, in theory, be activated for Ivan's personal protection at any moment. In 2026, with the cartel in an internal war, the Chapitos faction against the Mayos faction that erupted in late 2024, that security operation is running hot. The civil war inside Sinaloa, following the arrest of El Mayo Zambada and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, created a situation where Ivan cannot trust everyone around him. Former allies are now potential informants. Rivals within the same organization want him gone. Every person who knows his location is a potential $10 million payday. So you have this situation where a man with more personal wealth than most CEOs of Fortune 500 companies has to treat every person in his circle as a potential threat. That's not freedom. That's a very expensive prison without walls. Now let's be real. Even in 2026, even as a fugitive, Ivan Archivaldo is not living a miserable life. The parties didn't stop. They just moved. In cartel culture, celebrations happen in controlled environments. A private ranch outside the city. A compound with its own generator, its own catering, its own entertainment. Musicians who are paid to perform and then driven home blindfolded, so they don't know where they were. Narco corrido artists, banda groups, regional performers. The biggest names in Mexican regional music have performed at private cartel events. Sometimes willingly, sometimes because the invitation is more of a demand than a request. According to reporting from Latin Times in 2025, influencers and social media figures were being targeted and killed after being accused of having financial ties to Los Chapitos. That's the environment Ivan moves in. The people around him, even entertainers, even YouTube creators, can become targets in the internal war. So in 2026, the parties are tighter, the guest lists shorter, and the secrecy around them is absolute. But they still happen. The alcohol is still premium. The food is still 5-star. The service is still immaculate. Because this is a man who has never known anything else. No discussion of Ivan Archivaldo's lifestyle is complete without the weapons culture. This isn't just tools of the trade. In narco culture, weaponry is jewelry. It's status. Custom gold-plated AR-15s, engraved pistols with diamond inlays, AK-47s with custom woodwork. These are pieces that cost more than most people's cars, and they're worn like accessories. In the social media posts widely attributed to the Chapitos from the peak years, the weaponry was displayed right alongside the cars and the cash. This wasn't hiding anything. It was celebrating it. In 2026, those custom weapons exist in the same quantities, probably more. They're just not on the internet anymore. U.S. authorities accused Ivan and his brothers of running a drug trafficking operation that reaped hundreds of millions of dollars in profits by flooding the United States with fentanyl. Hundreds of millions. And that's what the prosecutors could document. The actual number, the full scope of what flows through the Sinaloa cartel's operations at the Chapitos level, is something the DEA itself acknowledges they can only estimate. The fentanyl operation alone is a machine. Pills pressed in clandestine laboratories in Culiacan, shipped across the border in everything from hollowed-out produce shipments to legitimate commercial freight, distributed through networks that stretch from Southern California to Chicago to New York. 1 kilogram of fentanyl can produce roughly 1 million counterfeit pills. 1 million pills at street value. Multiply that by the scale the Chapitos operate at. Shipments measured in the hundreds of kilograms, sometimes thousands. And you start to understand why the money is almost impossible to spend fast enough. And the fentanyl isn't even the only product. Cocaine from Colombia, methamphetamine from labs spread across Sinaloa State, heroin from the poppy fields that El Chapo first established decades ago. The Sinaloa cartel under the Chapitos is a full-service operation, and Ivan's faction controls some of the most profitable corridors. In 2026, with two brothers cooperating with U.S. prosecutors and potentially giving up financial intelligence, Ivan's money has to be moving through even more complex channels. Shell companies, real estate, businesses that look legitimate on paper, money laundering at a scale that makes most financial crimes look like shoplifting. The U.S. Treasury has sanctioned him, which means any U.S. person or institution doing business with him, knowingly or not, faces legal consequences. International banks are on alert, so the cash has to move through informal systems, through trusted intermediaries, through economies that don't have tight enough oversight to stop it. That money is still flowing, and it's still funding a lifestyle that most people can't even imagine. Here's where the walls start closing in, and the story of Ivan's 2026 lifestyle can't be told without understanding how much pressure is surrounding it right now. In July 2025, his half-brother Ovidio Guzman Lopez stood in the Dirksen Federal Building in Chicago and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of drug distribution and 2 counts of participation in a continuing criminal enterprise. He's now cooperating with the U.S. government, trying to reduce a potential life sentence by giving up information about the cartel's operations. Think about what that means for Ivan. Ovidio was inside the operation. He knows routes, contacts, financial structures, safe house locations, the names of corrupt officials on the payroll. Everything Ovidio gives up is potentially a bullet pointed directly at Ivan. And then there's Joaquin Guzman Lopez, the half-brother who was arrested in 2024 after allegedly helping orchestrate the betrayal of El Mayo Zambada, luring him onto a plane that landed in the United States. Joaquin is also in U.S. custody, also potentially cooperating. So Ivan Archivaldo, right now in 2026, is operating with the knowledge that 2 of his brothers are in rooms somewhere in the American federal prison system talking to prosecutors. That's not paranoia. That's the actual reality of his situation. In June 2025, the U.S. Treasury Department announced fresh sanctions specifically targeting Ivan and Jesus Alfredo. New designations, new financial restrictions, new rewards. The message from Washington was clear. These two men are the priority targets now that the others are in custody. And on the ground in Mexico, the internal cartel war that erupted in 2024 between Los Chapitos and Los Mayos turned Culiacan into a city on edge. Kidnappings, disappearances, murders, not just of cartel figures, but of civilians caught in the crossfire. The Mexican Secretary of Security confirmed steady pressure on both factions, with arrests of key lieutenants and security chiefs. In February 2025, Ivan's head of security, a man known as El Dos Cientos, his alias meaning 200, was captured by Mexican forces. His inner circle was shrinking. And then there's the tunnel story. Mexican authorities denied the Wall Street Journal's reporting that Ivan escaped through a tunnel in early 2025. But the Journal stood by its reporting. Whether you believe the official denial or the investigative journalists, the story itself tells you how close the net is getting. Forces were inside the same building. Evidence of his presence was found. He was close enough to touch. On the streets of Culiacan in 2026, everyone knows who Ivan is, but nobody talks. The culture of silence, what the Italians call omertà, and what in Sinaloa is just understood as the only way to stay alive, keeps the information contained. Informants get killed. Families of informants get threatened. The $10 million reward from the U.S. government is real, but in a city where the cartel controls large parts of daily life, taking that money means signing your own death warrant. So where does this leave us in 2026? Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar is 42 years old, give or take, because even his birth date has conflicting records in official U.S. government documents. He has spent his entire adult life inside the most violent, most lucrative, and most hunted criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere. He watched his father get extradited to a supermax prison in Colorado and sentenced to life. He watched 3 of his brothers get captured one by one. He survived a kidnapping by a rival cartel. He survived the Battle of Culiacan. He survived raids, indictments, sanctions, and a $10 million bounty on his existence. And yet in 2026, he is still free. Still the co-leader of the Sinaloa cartel. Still commanding an operation that moves fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin across the United States border at a volume that the DEA describes as a national emergency. His lifestyle in 2026 is the lifestyle of a man who understands something deeply, that every luxury comes with a price, and the price he pays is permanent vigilance. He lives in mansions, but he can never be comfortable in them for too long. He eats the best food, but the cook could be working for someone else. He commands an army, but armies can turn. He has more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But his chief money man is sitting in a U.S. federal court explaining where every dollar went. This is the paradox of the billionaire fugitive. The things that made him powerful, the wealth, the people around him, the lifestyle, are the same things that make him findable. Every compound costs money. Every trusted person knows his face. Every vehicle leaves a trail. But here's what really changed in 2026, and this is the part that matters. Ivan Archivaldo no longer posts on social media. The man who was once described by a security analyst as spending all his time on Facebook and WhatsApp, a man whose Instagram was a rolling documentary of the narco-billionaire life, has gone completely dark online. No public accounts, no blurred face photos, no party videos, no cars, no planes, no bottles. Because the flex era is over. El Chapo spent decades surviving by staying invisible, and Ivan spent his prime years doing the opposite, living publicly, loudly, ostentatiously, like the rules didn't apply to him. And maybe they didn't for a while, but in 2026, with two brothers cooperating in U.S. custody, with his security chief arrested, with Mexican special forces raiding his safe houses, with a U.S. Treasury designation and a DEA top priority target label on his back, the Instagram lifestyle is a liability now. The irony is thick. The son who was too flashy, too public, too much of a show-off for the old guard of the cartel is now living in more secrecy than El Chapo ever did. He has become the thing his father always was, a ghost. Somewhere in Sinaloa, somewhere in the mountains, moving through tunnels his father would have recognized. The difference is that El Chapo built his empire from nothing and operated in shadows by choice. Ivan inherited an empire and is now hiding in shadows by necessity. Will he be the last Chapito standing, or just the last one captured? Right now in 2026, nobody outside his inner circle knows the answer to that question. And $10 million says a lot of people are trying to find out.
Over to North America, where the Mexican Navy has said at least 11 suspected criminals were killed in northern Mexico.
On March 19, 2026, the Mexican Navy killed 11 cartel gunmen and arrested the daughter of one of the most powerful drug lords in history. They loaded her onto a military helicopter in full combat fatigues, flew her away from her luxurious ranch in Culiacan, and then let her go a few hours later. No charges, no explanation, just walked free.
The most powerful is the Sinaloa cartel. Almost the 70% of the world is infected by this cartel.
The daughter of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, a man who ran the Sinaloa cartel for over 30 years without ever being caught, was released after an operation that left bodies on the ground and a whole country asking the same question. How much did she pay to walk out? Rumors are saying $10 million cash to the Mexican government to make the whole thing disappear.
But each side's primary enemy remains the other. And in this war, the dynamics have changed.
Let me break down the criminal life of Monica Zambada Niebla and how she just pulled off one of the biggest bribes in Mexican history. Monica Zambada Niebla was the daughter of El Mayo Zambada, co-founder of the Sinaloa cartel and one of the richest, most powerful drug traffickers the world has ever seen. But unlike her brothers who got arrested, extradited, and locked up in U.S. prisons, Monica operated different. She wasn't out there moving bricks or shooting at rivals. She was the money, the cleaner, the one who made billions of dollars in drug proceeds look legitimate. The United States Treasury Department designated her as a key money launderer back in 2007. They said she ran front companies. They said she was part of the financial network that kept the Sinaloa cartel running. But in Mexico, no charges, no warrants, no problem. Until March 19th, when the Mexican military raided her property, killed 11 of her security team, arrested her in front of cameras, and then acted like it never happened. To understand how Monica Zambada got to this point, where she can allegedly bribe her way out of a military arrest, we gotta go back to where she came from. Let's rewind to March 2nd, 1980. Monica del Rosario Zambada Niebla was born in Culiacan, Sinaloa, the birthplace of the Sinaloa cartel and the heart of Mexico's drug trafficking empire. Her father, Ismael Zambada Garcia, was already deep in the game by then. He wasn't El Mayo yet. That name would come later. But he was building. Monica's mother was Rosario Niebla Cardosa, known as Chayito. According to journalist Annabel Hernandez, Chaito wasn't just some cartel wife. She was connected. Her brother-in-law was involved in drug trafficking, and it was through that family connection that El Mayo got his start, his first drug harvest. Chaito met El Mayo when they were teenagers at a butcher shop where he worked. They got married when he was 17 and she was 19. Religious ceremony first in Costa Rica, Sinaloa. Then they made it official in El Dorado. From that union came 5 children, and all their names start with M. That wasn't a coincidence. That was branding. The Zambada family did everything intentional. The kids were Maria Teresa Zambada, Niebla Midiam, Patricia Zambada, Niebla, Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla, known as El Vicentillo, Mónica del Rosario, Zambada Niebla, Modesta, Zambada Niebla. Mónica was right in the middle, not the oldest, not the youngest. But from jump, she was being raised in a world where the family business was drug trafficking. Now, here's the thing about growing up as El Mayo's daughter in Culiacán during the 1980s and 90s. Your father wasn't just some street dealer. By the time Monica was a teenager, El Mayo was co-lead in the Sinaloa Cartel alongside Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. They were moving tons of cocaine from Colombia through Mexico into the United States. They had politicians on payroll. They had entire police departments working for them. They had an empire. And Monica, she wasn't sheltered from it. The whole family was in. The U.S. Treasury Department later confirmed that El Mayo's wife Rosario and all 4 daughters, Maria Teresa, Miriam Patricia, Monica, and Modesta, were participants in the criminal enterprise. Not just aware of it, participants. But Monica's path was different from her brother Vicente's. While El Mayo was building one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, Monica was getting an education. She enrolled at the Universidad Autónoma de Sinaloa, the Autonomous University of Sinaloa, and studied business administration. On paper, she was a college student. In reality, she was learning how to run the financial side of a multi-billion-dollar drug empire. Think about it, business administration. That's accounting, finance, corporate structures, supply chain management. All the skills you need to launder money, set up shell companies, and move drug proceeds through legitimate businesses without getting caught. And that's exactly what she did. In May 2007, the United States Department of the Treasury dropped a whole organizational chart. They called it the Zambada Garcia Financial Network. And Monica's name was right there on it. The Treasury Department designated 6 companies as fronts for El Mayo's money laundering operations. And behind those companies, El Mayo's family, specifically Rosario Niebla Cardoza, his wife. All 4 daughters, Maria Teresa, Miriam Patricia, Monica, and Modesta. The main company they identified was Nueva Industria de Ganaderos de Culiacán, SIDCV, New Livestock Industry of Culiacán. It also operated under the name Lecheria Santa Monica, Santa Monica Dairy. This wasn't some small operation. The dairy had branches in 4 different Mexican states. Another company was Gasolinera Rosario, a gas station network registered under Rosario Niebla Cardoza's name. On the surface, these looked like legitimate businesses, a dairy, a gas station chain, normal companies doing normal business. But according to the U.S. government, they were being used to wash hundreds of millions of dollars in drug money. Here's how money laundering works in the cartel world. You can't just deposit $10 million in cash at a bank without red flags going up. So you gotta make that dirty money look clean. You buy legitimate businesses, restaurants, gas stations, dairies, construction companies. Then you mix the drug money with the real revenue from those businesses. Suddenly, your cocaine money looks like it came from selling milk or gas. You pay taxes on it, you report it to the government, and boom, it's clean. Monica's role, according to U.S. intelligence, was to act as a front person. She'd own the companies on paper. She'd manage the operations. She'd handle the finances. And in doing so, she'd launder massive amounts of drug proceeds for her father's cartel. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, put Monica on the specially designated nationals list. That's the U.S. government's way of saying, this person is helping drug traffickers. We're sanctioning her. American citizens can't do business with her. Her assets in the U.S. are frozen. But here's the crazy part. While the United States was designating Monica as a money launderer and sanctioning her companies, Mexico did nothing. No charges, no investigation, no arrest warrant. She kept living in Culiacan, kept running her businesses, kept operating like everything was normal. Why? Because in Sinaloa, the Zambada family wasn't just powerful. They were untouchable. For decades, the Zambada family ran the Sinaloa cartel without major consequences. El Mayo never got arrested, never got caught. He was a ghost, running one of the biggest drug trafficking organizations in the world from the mountains of Sinaloa, while the DEA and Mexican authorities chased shadows. But slowly, the empire started cracking. March 18, 2009, Monica's brother, Jesus Vicente Zambada Niebla, El Vicentillo, got arrested in Mexico City.
El Vicentillo con 5 individuos más que fungían como su escolta personal.
They found him in a mansion on Calle Lluvia, 269 in the Lomas del Pedregal neighborhood. He was a high-ranking member of the Sinaloa cartel, overseeing operations and logistics. El Vicentillo got extradited to the United States, and here's where it gets wild. He flipped. He became a cooperating witness for the U.S. government. In 2019, he testified against Joaquin El Chapo Guzman during El Chapo's trial in Brooklyn. His testimony was critical in getting El Chapo convicted and sentenced to life in prison. For cooperating, El Vicentillo got a reduced sentence, 15 years instead of life. He's expected to be released soon and will probably enter witness protection. So Monica's brother snitched on her father's partner. That's the level of dysfunction we talking about. But El Vicentillo wasn't the only Zambada kid who got caught up. Monica had half-brothers too. El Mayo had kids with multiple women. One of them was Ismael Zambada Imperial, known as Mayito Gordo. He got arrested in November 2014 in Mexico. Another half-brother, Serafin Zambada Ortiz, known as El Serra, also got arrested and eventually released. And then there's Ismael Zambada Siqueiros, Mayito Flaco, El Mayo's son from another woman. He's currently the leader of La Maíza faction of the Sinaloa cartel and one of the most wanted men in Mexico. But through all of this, all the arrests, all the snitching, all the chaos, Monica stayed clean. No arrests, no charges. She kept operating in the shadows, managing the money side of things while her brothers and half-brothers got locked up or killed. Then came July 25th, 2024. The day everything changed. July 25th, 2024. Ismael El Mayo Zambada and Joaquin Guzman Lopez, one of El Chapo's sons, flew into El Paso, Texas on a private plane. Both got arrested by U.S. authorities. But here's the twist. El Mayo didn't surrender willingly. He got kidnapped by Joaquin Guzman Lopez, El Chapo's son.
The largest, most violent, and most prolific fentanyl trafficking operation.
According to El Mayo's own testimony, Joaquin lured him to a meeting under false pretenses, said they were going to discuss a property deal and resolve some issues with politicians. When El Mayo showed up, he got ambushed. Joaquin's men rushed through a window they'd removed the glass from, threw El Mayo down, put a bag over his head, zip-tied him, drugged him with sedatives, and flew him across the border to American authorities. Joaquin did this hopping for leniency for himself and his brothers. He wanted a plea deal, and he got one. In December 2025, he pleaded guilty and agreed to forfeit $80 million. But the consequences of that betrayal? A full-scale civil war in Sinaloa. September 9, 2024. The war officially started. Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, versus La Mayiza, El Mayo's faction led by his son Mayito Flaco. From September 2024 to March 2025, the death toll was insane. 1,972 homicides, 2,077 plus forced disappearances, 5.4 murders per day, 14,000 federal troops deployed to Culiacan, 10,000 jobs, lost 50,000 people protesting the violence. Los Chapitos started losing badly. Mayito Flaco, allied with Chapo Isidro, another powerful cartel boss who hated the Guzman family. Together, they took over 90% of Los Chapitos' territory. Key leaders got arrested. Ivan Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo Guzman, the top Chapitos leaders, reportedly fled Sinaloa entirely. And through all this chaos, where was Monica? She was in Culiacan, in the heart of La Mayiza territory, protected by her half-brother Mayito Flaco's organization. Living on a luxurious ranch in El Alamo, a suburb of Culiacan known for cartel-owned properties. March 19, 2026. Around 3 a.m. Mexican Navy forces, backed by the Secretariat of Security and Citizen Protection, launched coordinated raids across rural areas surrounding Culiacan. The target? La Mayiza faction properties. The main target was allegedly Joel Enrique S., also known as L-19, a lieutenant in Mayito Flaco's structure. But when federal forces moved in on a luxurious ranch house in El Alamo, they found something else, or rather, someone else. Monica Zambada Niebla, El Mayo's daughter, wearing military-style fatigues. Also present, her husband, name not publicly disclosed, and their young daughter, El Mayo's granddaughter. The moment the military identified the property as connected to the Zambada family, all hell broke loose. La Mayiza gunmen opened fire on the federal forces. A massive shootout erupted. Automatic weapons, heavy firepower. This wasn't a quick raid, this was a battle. When the smoke cleared, 11 La Mayiza sicarios were dead. Monica Zambada Niebla was in custody. Her husband was in custody. Their daughter was in protective custody. Another cartel member, Omar Oswaldo Torres Cabada, alias El Patas, was arrested in the nearby town of Valle Escondido. The Mexican Navy established a security perimeter around the entire area. They blocked off roads leading to El Salado and El Alamo. No one in, no one out. Photos and videos started leaking on social media. Monica Bayan loaded onto a Navy helicopter. Military personnel surrounding her. The bodies of dead sicarios on the ground. Burned out vehicles. shell casings everywhere. This was a major operation, the kind you see when the government is serious about taking down high-value targets. And for a few hours, it looked like the Mexican government had finally decided to go after the Zambada family's financial network. Then, just as quickly as it started, it ended. Within hours of her arrest, Monica Zambada Niebla was released. No charges filed, no investigation announced. The Security Cabinet of Mexico issued a statement that read, "During this operation, a woman, identified as the daughter of a criminal leader, was also located. She has no connection to criminal activities nor any outstanding warrants against her, and was therefore released and handed over to her family in accordance with established protocols and in strict adherence to the law." Let that sink in. They raided her property. They killed 11 gunmen who were protecting her. They arrested her in military fatigues on a ranch owned by a cartel faction. And then they said she has no connection to criminal activities. Security Secretary Omar Garcia Harfuch doubled down. He said, "In the past 20 years, no arrest warrant has been obtained in either the United States or Mexico against this person. It is an administrative process in which individuals are designated for suspicious or illicit operations." But here's the problem with that statement. The U.S. Treasury Department's OFAC designation from 2007 is still active. Monica Zambada Niebla is still on the specially designated nationals list. The sanctions against her, her mother, and her 3 sisters are still in effect. The U.S. government still identifies her as a money launderer for the Sinaloa cartel. Mexican security officials tried to claim the OFAC designation was lifted in 2019. But when reporters checked with the U.S. government, they found that wasn't true. The EFE news agency confirmed the sanctions are still active. So the Mexican government was lying. Security analyst David Saucedo told Infobae Mexico, "It is true that in Mexico there is no criminal case as such. There are no charges against her. But in the United States, there are. She appears in the Office of Foreign Assets Control. They published some time ago an organizational chart where she appears as a front person and as part of the financial structure used for money laundering." El Universal columnist Alberto Capella went even harder. He called the government's explanation weak and incomplete. He asked why, if Monica has no connection to criminal activities, the Mexican Navy launched a massive military operation directly targeting her family's property. Why kill 11 people to arrest someone who's supposedly innocent? Capella also suggested that the arrest might not have been approved by the U.S. government. He speculated it could endanger the plea deal negotiations with El Mayo, who's currently in federal custody in Brooklyn awaiting trial. But the question everyone was asking is simpler. How much did she pay? Almost immediately after Monica's release, rumors started spreading on social media and in Mexican news outlets. $10 million. That's the number being reported. $10 million in cash, allegedly paid to members of the Mexican Navy to secure her release. Now, these are unconfirmed reports. There's no paper trail. No one from the government is going to admit to taking a bribe. But in Mexico, especially when it comes to cartel-related arrests, this kind of thing isn't rare. It's how the system works. Let me put this in perspective. El Mayo Zambada, at the time of his arrest, was estimated to be worth somewhere between $500 million and $3 billion. That's from decades of moving cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the United States. He's been in the game since the 1970s, He co-led the Sinaloa Cartel, the richest, most powerful drug trafficking organization in history. Monica is his daughter. She managed the financial side, she ran the front companies, she laundered the money. You think she doesn't have access to tens of millions of dollars in cash? $10 million to walk away from a federal arrest, where 11 of your security team just got killed, is nothing. That's the cost of doing business. And the Mexican Navy? They've been accused of corruption for decades, taking bribes from cartels, letting high-value targets escape, turning a blind eye to drug shipments. This wouldn't be new. Social media accounts started posting that the whole operation was a show, that the arrest was staged so the government could justify releasing her later, that the military went in knowing they'd let her go. But they needed the spectacle of the raid to make it look legitimate. One Twitter account with ties to Cartel reporting said, "The bribe of the year, Monica Zambada, daughter of El Mayo Zambada, released after her detention." Reports of a multi-million-dollar bribe exceeding $10 million paid to members of the Navy to secure her release. So far, there is no clear position from the authorities, which keeps the case shrouded in uncertainty. The account continued, "What is clear, however, is the incompetence of the authorities in the face of a high-level action like this, in which they are easily bribed, making a fool of the entire country." And here's the thing, nobody in Mexico was surprised. So where does this leave Monica Zambada Niebla? As of right now, she's a free woman, back with her family, back in Culiacan, protected by La Maíza, and apparently untouchable by Mexican law enforcement. El Patas, Omar Oswaldo Torres Cabada, the guy arrested with her, he's still in custody. He's a cartel lieutenant, so they're keeping him locked up. But Monica, she walked. The Mexican government is hoping this story goes away. They're hoping people forget about the 11 dead sicarios, the military raid, the leaked videos, and the fact that they arrested and released one of the most wanted money launderers in the cartel world. But the United States government is watching. El Mayo is currently in federal custody in Brooklyn. He's cooperating to some degree. They got him to plead guilty to 2 counts in August 2025. But if the U.S. finds out that Mexico arrested his daughter and then let her go for a bribe, that's gonna complicate things. There's also the question of whether Monica's arrest was connected to El Mayo's plea deal. Some analysts think the U.S. might have pushed Mexico to go after Monica as leverage against El Mayo, force him to cooperate more by threatening his family. But if that's true and Mexico let her go anyway, that's a huge betrayal of U.S.-Mexico cooperation on cartel cases. And then there's the civil war still raging in Sinaloa. La Maíza versus Los Chapitos. Monica's half-brother, Mayito Flaco, is winning that war right now. He controls most of the state. He has Chapo Isidro as an ally, and he's not gonna let anything happen to his sister. So even if the US wanted to extradite Monica, even if Mexico suddenly decided to charge her, La Maíza would protect her with force. The reality is, Monica Zambada Niebla is probably gonna stay free. She's gonna keep managing the money. She's gonna keep laundering drug proceeds. She's gonna keep operating in the shadows, just like she's been doing for the past 20 years. Because in Sinaloa, if you got enough money and enough firepower, the law don't apply to you. Monica Zambada Niebla's story is a perfect example of how the cartel system works in Mexico. It's not just about violence. It's not just about drugs. It's about money, power, and corruption at the highest levels of government. El Mayo built an empire that lasted over 30 years without him ever getting arrested. How? Because he paid off everyone. Politicians, police, military, judges. He made it so expensive to go after him that it wasn't worth it. And Monica learned from the best. She didn't run around with guns. She didn't post on social media. She didn't draw attention to herself. She just managed the money, kept her head down, and made sure everyone who needed to get paid got paid. The March 19th raid was supposed to be different. It was supposed to show that Mexico was serious about going after the Zambada family, even with El Mayo in U.S. custody. But instead, it showed the opposite. It showed that even when 11 people die in a firefight, even when the whole world is watching, the Zambada family can still buy their way out. $10 million. That's the price of freedom for a cartel princess. And the Mexican government took it. This story matters because it shows why the war on drugs in Mexico is never going to be won. You can arrest all the sicarios you want. You can kill all the gunmen. But if the people at the top, the money launderers, the financial operators, the ones who make the whole system work, can just pay their way out, nothing changes. El Mayo's in prison. El Chapo's in prison. But their kids, their wives, their daughters, they still operating. They still moving money. They still running the show. Monica Zambada Niebla walked free on March 19th, 2026. And she's going to keep walking free because in Mexico, money talks louder than justice. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Was this a bribe or is there something else going on? And subscribe if you want more deep dives into cartel stories that don't get told.
She was born into a world where avocados and opium poppies grew side by side, where family loyalty meant everything, and where money flowed like rivers through the mountains of Michoacán. At first glance, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia seemed destined for a quiet, rural life among her 17 siblings. But destiny had other plans. When she married Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes in 1996, she wasn't just becoming the wife of a man who would later become Mexico's most wanted drug lord. She was uniting two criminal dynasties that would reshape the global narcotics trade forever. This wasn't a love story. This was a merger of empires. Meet Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, known in the underworld as La Jefa, the boss, the financial mastermind behind the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the woman who turned dirty money into legitimate billions. Every cartel boss's dream woman, beautiful, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless when it came to business. But here's what makes her story truly extraordinary. She didn't marry into the narco world. She was born into it. Her family didn't just grow drugs. They invented the blueprint that would become the CJNG. And when she joined forces with El Mencho, they created something the world had never seen before. A cartel that operated like a Fortune 500 company. Today, we step inside the hidden world of Mexico's most powerful narco queen. This is the story of how a farm girl from Michoacán became the financial architect of a multi-billion-dollar criminal empire. This is the story of La Jefa. To understand Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, you have to understand where she came from. Born in the rugged mountains of rural Michoacán in the 1970s, she entered a world where the line between legitimate business and criminal enterprise had been blurred for generations. Michoacán wasn't just any Mexican state. It was the birthplace of Mexico's modern drug trade. The fertile volcanic soil that made it perfect for growing avocados also made it ideal for cultivating marijuana and opium poppies. For families like the Gonzalez Valencias, this wasn't a choice between legal and illegal crops. It was about survival and opportunity. Rosalinda was the eldest daughter among 18 siblings. Yes, 18. In a family that size, everyone had a role to play. And from an early age, Rosalinda showed she had the intelligence and leadership qualities that would set her apart. While her brothers learned the physical aspects of the trade, cultivation, transportation, and protection, Rosalinda absorbed the business side. She watched how money moved, how deals were structured, and how legitimate businesses could be used to hide illegal profits. The González Valencia family wasn't just another group of farmers turned drug dealers. They were visionaries. In the 1970s, when most Mexican drug operations were small-scale and disorganized, the González Valencias were already thinking bigger. They understood that the real money wasn't just in growing drugs. It was in controlling the entire supply chain from production to distribution. This forward-thinking approach led them to form what would become known as the Milenio Cartel in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Unlike other criminal groups that relied purely on violence and intimidation, the Milenio Cartel operated more like a corporation. They invested in infrastructure, developed sophisticated smuggling routes, and most importantly, they understood the power of money laundering. But the González Valencia family's true genius lay in their ability to separate their violent operations from their financial operations. While the Milenio Cartel handled the drugs, guns, and territorial disputes, the family created a parallel organization focused purely on money, Los Queenies. Los Queenies, led by Rosalinda's brother Abigail González Valencia, known as El Queenie, became the financial backbone of the family's operations. They weren't just washing drug money. They were building a legitimate business empire that could generate profits independent of drug sales, real estate, agriculture, tourism, healthcare. Los Queenies had their fingers in every profitable sector of the Mexican economy. This is where Rosalinda truly learned her craft. While other cartel wives were relegated to spending money on luxury goods and staying out of business affairs, Rosalinda was being groomed as a financial strategist. She understood corporate structures, international banking, and most importantly, how to make dirty money look clean. By the time she reached her 20s, Rosalinda González Valencia wasn't just the daughter of a drug trafficking family. She was a key player in one of Mexico's most sophisticated criminal financial networks. She had the education, the connections, and the ruthless business acumen that would make her invaluable to any criminal organization. But she was about to meet someone who would change everything. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, the man who would become El Mencho, wasn't born into the drug trade like Rosalinda. He was a farm worker, a man who understood hard labor and the value of loyalty. But he was also ambitious, intelligent, and absolutely fearless when it came to violence. El Mencho first encountered the González Valencia family in the 1980s when he was hired as a guard for their marijuana plantations. This wasn't unusual. The family employed hundreds of workers across their various operations, but El Mencho stood out. He was reliable, he was smart, and most importantly, he understood that success in this business required both brains and brutality. As El Mencho proved his worth to the González Valencia clan, he was gradually brought deeper into their operations. He learned their methods, their roots, and their philosophy of business. But more than that, he caught the attention of Rosalinda. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared ambition rather than simple romance. Rosalinda saw in El Mencho someone who could provide the muscle and street credibility that her family's financial operations needed. El Mencho saw in Rosalinda someone who could teach him how to turn violence into sustainable wealth. In the early 1990s, El Mencho made his first serious attempt to expand into the United States market. Like many ambitious Mexican traffickers, he saw America as the ultimate prize, a country with an insatiable appetite for drugs and the money to pay premium prices. But his first ventures into the U.S. market ended in disaster. El Mencho was arrested twice in the United States on drug charges during his 20s. Both times he was convicted and deported back to Mexico. For many criminals, this would have been the end of their American dreams. But El Mencho was different. Each arrest taught him valuable lessons about American law enforcement, about the weaknesses in existing smuggling operations, and about the importance of having sophisticated financial backing. When El Mencho returned to Mexico after his second deportation, he made a decision that would change the course of Mexican organized crime forever. Instead of trying to rebuild his operations from scratch, he would align himself permanently with the González Valencia family. And the best way to cement that alliance was through marriage. On a quiet day in 1996, in a ceremony that was deliberately kept low-key, Rosalinda González Valencia married Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. To outsiders, it might have looked like a simple wedding between two people from the same rural community, but those who understood the dynamics of Mexico's drug trade knew they were witnessing something historic. As El País newspaper would later describe it, this marriage brought together the power of two worlds, that of bazookas and that of dollars. El Mencho brought the violence and muscle, the ability to eliminate competitors, control territory, and command respect through fear. Rosalinda brought the money and financial infrastructure, the ability to turn criminal profits into legitimate wealth and sustainable power. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a merger, and like any successful merger, it combined the strengths of both parties while covering their weaknesses. El Mencho had proven he could move drugs and eliminate enemies, but his previous attempts at building a lasting organization had failed because he lacked the financial sophistication to sustain growth. Rosalinda had access to one of Mexico's most advanced money laundering networks, but Los Quinas needed the kind of territorial control and enforcement capability that only someone like El Mencho could provide. The timing of their marriage was also crucial. By 1996, Mexico's drug trade was undergoing a massive transformation. The old guard cartels, the Guadalajara cartel, the Gulf cartel, and the early versions of what would become the Sinaloa cartel were either fragmenting due to internal conflicts or struggling to adapt to increased law enforcement pressure from both Mexican and American authorities. This created an opportunity for a new kind of criminal organization, one that could combine the territorial control and violence of traditional cartels with the financial sophistication and legitimate business integration that the Gonzalez Valencia family had perfected. El Mencho and Rosalinda weren't just getting married. They were positioning themselves to fill a power vacuum that was about to reshape the entire Mexican underworld. The early years of their marriage coincided with El Mencho's rise through the ranks of the Milenio cartel, but both he and Rosalinda understood that their ultimate goal wasn't to serve someone else's organization. It was to build their own empire. The opportunity came in the mid-2000s when the Milenio cartel began to fragment due to arrests of key leaders and internal power struggles. Rather than fight for control of the existing organization, El Mencho made a strategic decision. He would create something entirely new. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación, or CJNG, was officially born around 2010, but its foundations had been laid years earlier through the marriage of El Mencho and Rosalinda. From the very beginning, the CJNG was designed to be different from other cartels. Traditional cartels were essentially armed gangs that happened to traffic drugs. They were hierarchical, territorial, and relied primarily on violence to maintain control. The CJNG, by contrast, was designed from the ground up to be a hybrid organization, part criminal gang, part multinational corporation. This is where Rosalinda's influence became crucial. While El Mencho focused on recruitment, territorial expansion, and the violent aspects of cartel operations, Rosalinda was building the financial infrastructure that would make the CJNG sustainable and scalable. She didn't just launder money, she created an entire parallel economy. Using the lessons she had learned from her family's Los Quinas organization, Rosalinda began establishing legitimate businesses that could serve multiple purposes. They could launder drug profits, they could provide cover for criminal operations, and most importantly, they could generate legitimate income that would make the organization less dependent on drug trafficking alone. By 2015, Mexican authorities estimated that Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia controlled a network of over 70 businesses affiliated with the CJNG. These weren't just front companies designed to hide criminal activity. They were profitable enterprises that generated real value while serving the cartel's needs. The scope of her business empire was staggering. She had investments in healthcare companies that could provide medical services to cartel members and their families. She owned tourism and hospitality businesses that could move money across borders and provide meeting places for criminal associates. She controlled retail operations that could distribute products and provide employment for cartel supporters. Her agricultural companies weren't just growing legal crops, they were developing the infrastructure and expertise that could be quickly converted to drug cultivation if needed. Her consulting firms provided legitimate business advice, while also serving as intelligence gathering operations. Her advertising companies could influence public opinion, and provide cover for communications between cartel members. But perhaps most impressively, Rosalinda had moved into international trade. Through a network of import-export companies, she was able to move money and goods across borders in ways that were virtually impossible for law enforcement to track. She understood that the future of organized crime wasn't just about controlling territory in Mexico. It was about building global networks that could operate in multiple countries simultaneously. According to Mexican authorities, between 2015 and 2016 alone, Rosalinda was responsible for laundering over 1 billion Mexican pesos, approximately 50 million US dollars. But this figure likely represents only a fraction of her actual financial operations, as it only includes the transactions that authorities were able to identify and track. What made Rosalinda truly dangerous wasn't just the amount of money she was moving. It was how sophisticated her operations had become. She wasn't just washing drug money through simple cash-intensive businesses like restaurants and car washes. She was creating complex financial instruments, international investment vehicles, and legitimate business partnerships that could generate profits and provide cover for criminal operations simultaneously. The U.S. Treasury Department eventually identified specific businesses that were part of her network: a sushi restaurant chain with locations in Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, a premium tequila company based in Guadalajara, a luxury rental cabin business in the mountain resort town of Tapalpa, an advertising firm, and multiple agricultural companies. Each of these businesses served multiple purposes. The restaurants could launder cash while providing meeting places for cartel associates. The tequila company could export products to the United States while potentially smuggling drugs or money. The rental cabins could house cartel members or serve as safe houses for criminal operations. The advertising firm could influence public opinion while gathering intelligence on competitors and law enforcement. This wasn't just money laundering. This was the creation of a legitimate business empire that happened to be funded by criminal profits. And at the center of it all was Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, the woman who had transformed from a farm girl from Michoacan into one of the most sophisticated financial criminals in the world. By 2018, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia had become too successful for her own good. Her financial network had grown so large and sophisticated that it was impossible to hide from international law enforcement agencies. The U.S. Treasury Department had been tracking her operations for years, and Mexican authorities were under increasing pressure to take action against the CJNG's financial infrastructure. On May 26, 2018, Rosalinda's carefully constructed world came crashing down. She was arrested by the Mexican Navy outside a 7-Eleven convenience store in Zapopan, Jalisco, a mundane location for such a significant moment in the history of organized crime. The arrest wasn't random. Mexican authorities had been conducting surveillance on Rosalinda for months, tracking her movements and building a case against her money laundering operations. They chose to move when they did because they had gathered enough evidence to charge her with financial crimes while avoiding the more complex task of proving her direct involvement in drug trafficking. The charges against Rosalinda focused on money laundering, specifically her failure to properly report financial transactions and her use of legitimate businesses to hide criminal profits. But everyone involved understood that this was just the beginning. The real goal was to dismantle the financial infrastructure that made the CJNG possible. For 3 months, Rosalinda remained in custody while her lawyers fought the charges. This period was crucial for both her and the CJNG. Without her direct oversight, the cartel's financial operations became less efficient and more vulnerable to law enforcement detection. Several of her businesses were forced to shut down or scale back operations, and the flow of laundered money slowed significantly. But Rosalinda had built her network well. Even from prison, she was able to maintain some control over her operations through trusted associates and family members. And her lawyers, some of the best money could buy, were working around the clock to secure her release. In August 2018, after paying 1.5 million Mexican pesos, approximately 78,000 US dollars, in bail, Rosalinda was released from prison. Officially, she was free pending trial. Unofficially, everyone knew this was just a temporary reprieve. Rosalinda's freedom lasted just over 3 years. During this time, she attempted to rebuild her financial network while staying below the radar of law enforcement. But she made a critical mistake. She couldn't stay away from her family. On November 15, 2021, Rosalinda arrived at a courthouse in Zapopan for a hearing related to her son Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, known as El Menchito, who was facing his own legal troubles. It was a moment of maternal instinct that would cost her everything. Mexican authorities had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. They knew that despite all her sophistication and caution, Rosalinda would eventually expose herself to support her family. When she arrived at the courthouse, she was immediately arrested by federal agents. This second arrest was different from the first. By 2021, authorities had spent years building a more comprehensive case against Rosalinda. They had tracked additional financial transactions, identified more businesses in her network, and gathered evidence of her ongoing involvement in money laundering operations, even after her first arrest. The timing was also significant. The arrest came at a moment when the CJNG was facing increased pressure from both Mexican and American law enforcement. El Mencho himself had become one of the most wanted men in the world, with a $10 million bounty on his head from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. By targeting Rosalinda, authorities were striking at the financial heart of the organization. Mexican officials described her arrest as a significant blow to the financial structure of organized crime in the state of Jalisco. This wasn't just rhetoric. Without Rosalinda's direct oversight, the CJNG's money laundering operations became significantly less efficient and more vulnerable to detection. In December 2023, after more than 2 years in custody, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia was finally convicted. But the conviction was both a victory and a disappointment for authorities. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for failing to disclose financial transactions related to a car wash she owned in Puerto Vallarta, Jalisco, between 2015 and 2016. The charges were specific and narrow, focusing on her failure to report certain transactions rather than proving her broader involvement in organized crime. This was a deliberate strategy by prosecutors. Rather than trying to prove the more complex charges related to drug trafficking and organized crime, which would have required extensive evidence and carried the risk of acquittal, they focused on financial crimes that were easier to prove and virtually impossible to defend against. But as Rosalinda's lawyer pointed out, the case stopped short of connecting her to organized crime. The prosecution couldn't prove that the money she failed to report came from drug trafficking, and they couldn't establish her direct involvement in the CJNG's violent operations. This was both a legal victory and a practical defeat for Rosalinda. On one hand, she had avoided the more serious charges that could have resulted in decades in prison. On the other hand, she was still facing 5 years behind bars, and her financial empire was in ruins. The conviction also highlighted the challenges that law enforcement faces when dealing with sophisticated financial criminals like Rosalinda. While everyone knew she was the financial mastermind behind one of the world's most powerful drug cartels, proving that in court was a different matter entirely. On February 27, 2025, just days ago as of this recording, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia walked out of the Federal Center for Social Readaptation for Women in Coatlan del Rio, Morelos. She had served approximately 3 years of her 5-year sentence and was released early for good behavior. Her release marks a significant moment in the ongoing story of the CJNG and Mexico's drug war. After years in prison, La Jefa is free again. But the world she's returning to is very different from the one she left behind. During her incarceration, the CJNG continued to operate and even expand its influence. But without Rosalinda's financial expertise, the organization became more dependent on violence and less sophisticated in its business operations. The cartel is still powerful, but it's not the same hybrid criminal corporate entity that she helped create. There are also questions about her relationship with El Mencho. According to Mexican military intelligence, Rosalinda and El Mencho have been separated since her first arrest in 2018. Reports suggest that El Mencho is now in a relationship with a woman named Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo. However, Rosalinda and El Mencho remain legally married as of 2025. This separation, if it's real, represents more than just a personal split. It suggests that the power marriage that created the modern CJNG may have run its course. Without the combination of El Mencho's violence and Rosalinda's financial acumen, the cartel may be vulnerable to both law enforcement pressure and competition from rival organizations. Rosalinda González Valencia's story is ultimately about more than just one woman's rise and fall in the world of organized crime. It's about the evolution of criminal organizations in the 21st century and the increasing sophistication of financial crime. When Rosalinda first married El Mencho in 1996, Mexican cartels were primarily violent gangs that happened to traffic drugs. They were territorial, hierarchical, and dependent on intimidation and corruption to maintain control. The idea of a cartel operating like a multinational corporation was virtually unthinkable, but Rosalinda changed that. Through her financial innovations and business acumen, she helped transform the CJNG into something unprecedented, a criminal organization that could generate legitimate profits while maintaining its illegal operations. She proved that the future of organized crime wasn't just about controlling territory or eliminating competitors. It was about building sustainable business models that could adapt to changing circumstances. Her network of over 70 legitimate businesses wasn't just a money laundering scheme. It was a blueprint for how criminal organizations could integrate themselves into the legal economy. By creating businesses that generated real value and provided real services, she made the CJNG less dependent on drug trafficking alone and more resilient to law enforcement pressure. This model has been copied by criminal organizations around the world, from Russian oligarchs to Chinese triads to Italian-American crime families. The lessons that Rosalinda pioneered in Jalisco have become standard practice for sophisticated criminal enterprises. But her story also illustrates the ultimate limitations of even the most sophisticated criminal operations. Despite all her intelligence, education, and business acumen, Rosalinda couldn't escape the fundamental contradiction at the heart of organized crime: the need to maintain family relationships and personal connections that inevitably create vulnerabilities. Her downfall came not because law enforcement cracked her financial codes or infiltrated her business network. It came because she couldn't abandon her role as a mother and wife, even when doing so would have protected her criminal empire. As Rosalinda González Valencia begins her new life as a free woman, the question everyone is asking is, what's next for La Jefa? Officially, she's a convicted felon who served time for financial crimes. She's prohibited from engaging in many types of business activities, and she's undoubtedly under constant surveillance by both Mexican and American law enforcement agencies. Any attempt to rebuild her criminal empire would be detected quickly and prosecuted aggressively. But Rosalinda González Valencia didn't become one of the world's most sophisticated financial criminals by being obvious or predictable. If she chooses to return to criminal activity, it will likely be in ways that are subtle, innovative, and difficult to detect. There's also the question of whether she wants to return to that life at all. After spending 3 years in prison and watching her empire crumble, she may have decided that the costs of criminal activity outweigh the benefits. She's in her late 40s now, with grandchildren and the possibility of a legitimate life ahead of her. But for someone who was once known as La Jefa, the boss, the transition to ordinary life may be more difficult than the transition to prison. Rosalinda González Valencia spent decades at the center of one of the world's most powerful criminal organizations. She controlled billions of dollars, employed thousands of people, and influenced the global drug trade. That kind of power and influence is difficult to give up voluntarily. Whatever she chooses to do next, one thing is certain. The story of Rosalinda González Valencia has changed the way we think about organized crime, financial crime, and the role of women in criminal organizations. She proved that in the modern world, the most dangerous criminals aren't necessarily the ones with the biggest guns. They're the ones with the smartest accountants. The story of Rosalinda González Valencia is ultimately a story about power, how it's acquired, how it's maintained, and how it's lost. Born into a world where crime and legitimate business were inseparable, she used her intelligence and ambition to become one of the most influential figures in the history of organized crime. Her marriage to El Mencho wasn't just a personal relationship. It was a strategic alliance that created the most sophisticated criminal organization Mexico had ever seen. By combining violence with financial expertise, territory with legitimate business, they built an empire that challenged traditional assumptions about how criminal organizations operate. But empires built on crime are inherently unstable. No matter how sophisticated the money laundering, how extensive the business network, or how careful the operational security, Criminal organizations ultimately depend on relationships between people, and people have weaknesses, family loyalties, personal emotions, and human needs that can't be eliminated through better planning or more sophisticated technology. Rosalinda's downfall came not because she made a mistake in her financial operations, but because she couldn't abandon her role as a mother. Her arrest at her son's court hearing was the kind of human moment that no amount of criminal sophistication can prevent. As she begins this new chapter of her life, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia remains one of the most fascinating and complex figures in the modern history of organized crime. She's a woman who rose from rural poverty to control billions of dollars, who transformed a violent gang into a multinational corporation, and who proved that in the 21st century, the pen truly can be mightier than the sword. Whether she chooses to rebuild her empire, retire to a quiet life, or find some middle ground between crime and legitimacy, her legacy is already secure. She changed the game forever. She showed the world what's possible when intelligence meets opportunity, when family loyalty combines with criminal ambition, and when a farm girl from Michoacan decides she's destined for more than the quiet life. This has been the story of La Jefa, the boss, the financial mastermind behind the CJNG, the woman who proved that in the world of organized crime, the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's a brilliant mind that understands how money really works. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden world of Mexico's narco elite, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're constantly uncovering the untold stories behind the headlines, bringing you inside access to the world's most powerful and dangerous criminal organizations. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, the most interesting stories are often the ones that never make the evening news.